Chapter 16. Rewards 2. Lionel was overwhelmed. How could he possibly sift through so many treasures? What do you suggest, Uncle Montez? Montez smiled. First, I don't suggest you trade in your 5 Tier 4 black rewards for a Tier 5 one. In your current state, you can't afford to be picky. If you have to rely on treasures you pick up in the zones you enter, you won't last very long. In addition, as I said before, the things you picked up from there will disappear once you leave this place. In this present state, not only are zones dangerous, but your world itself is dangerous too. You might have run into the invalids already, Yacht. Lionel opened his mouth to answer, but only nodded in the end. He had almost forgotten about the weird changes in his white-pupilled Pearsaw, so they were called invalids. He didn't have to think much to understand why that was. Unfortunately, he was running out of time, so he knew he couldn't ask Montez about it. It also seemed that Montez was purposely not answering as well. Do you have the ability to narrow these down by my needs? Lionel asked. After seeing Montez nod, he immediately organized his thoughts. How would you categorize these treasures? There are defensive treasures that range from armors to one-time use tokens. There are offensive treasures that range from weapons to, again, one-time use tokens. There are techniques that touch on anything from improving your strength to your defense to your offense. You can trade for sub-dimension zone analyzing treasures to get a more accurate read on the zones you enter. These are categorized as detection treasures. The best ones can be used outside of zones as well. You can also trade for information. It can be information about where zones will appear in your world, or even information about other worlds. It's also possible to buy a ticket to another world, though it would cost you your Tier 9 black reward. Lionel's eyes flashed with a sharp light. Can you show me your Tier 9 black techniques? Preferably the ones that teach how to use the same energy as the priest I just fought? Ho ho ho. Montez smiled a smile that wasn't a smile, but his eyes seemed to give away that he was extremely satisfied with Lionel's choice. The counter magically shrunk down, leaving a pile of hundreds of booklets. It was clear at a glance that though a Tier 9 black technique was valuable to Lionel now, it definitely didn't mean much to Montez. Though the options were narrowed down, Lionel still felt lost. If only his sensory-type abilities were able to seek out what he needed. At this thought, Lionel raised an internal eyebrow. What if it could? He didn't know anything about his abilities currently, and he was actually tempted to ask for a treasure that could tell him about it. But he subconsciously felt that this wasn't the best idea. One thing that was clear to him about these treasures is that none of them were perfect. He most certainly couldn't expect a black-grade treasure to be so. If he found such a helpful treasure, it might lead him down the wrong path. And even if it was correct, it might limit him by boxing in his thinking. Lionel closed his eyes, trying to tap into the same sixth sense he used to battle the priest. Once he locked onto that feeling once more, his eyes flashed open. In that moment, the seemingly ordinary piles of books became a violent storm of raging colors. No, once again, they weren't truly colors. Lionel's mind only interpreted them as such, almost like an odd form of synesthesia. Lionel realized now that compared to these books, the priest had been a joke. But this made sense. He was only the bosses of a Tier 4 black zone, while these were Tier 9 black techniques. However, he soon found differences between them. Among even these high-tier techniques, there were separations. Lionel immediately discarded the worst of them and focused on the 5 that shone so brightly that even while being buried beneath the pile, they exposed themselves. He stepped forward and pushed all the other away, leaving 5. Shaitan, I can't read what they are. Just as Lionel was thinking this, the words on the 5 thin booklets rearranged themselves, becoming legible English. There's still a small bit of fairness in the world. Monte laughed, hiding his shock. Anything you take out of this world will remain translated for you. Lionel nodded, thankful. I pick this one. At this point, even Montez was stunned to the point of no longer being able to hide his reactions. Lionel hadn't deliberated for more than a split second before he put his hand over a booklet, taking it from the counter. Lionel shrugged. I felt this one could help improve my ability. I had already chosen before I knew its name. Dimensional Cleansia. It can indeed improve one's ability. But how did you know that? I don't know. Just felt it. Montez's eyes narrowed. He could tell that Lionel wasn't lying. But Even if he was, Montez wouldn't press him regardless. The others are powerful as well, so why this one in particular? They gave me auxiliary abilities I didn't need. Before I think of gaining extra stuff, I want to focus on my own. I feel that it's very powerful. Monte couldn't refute. He had never seen someone with a pseudo-fourth-dimensional constitution do what Lionel just did. For my 2 Tier 5 black rewards, can you show me some flexible armors? Lionel wanted to look through Dimensional Cleanse now, but he refrained. He felt that Montez had reminded him about the time for a reason. He likely couldn't stay here forever. Montez clapped his hands once more, causing the counter to shift. This time there were even more items to display. Not only were there more, but they also took up a larger space individually than small booklets did. In addition, it was a lower tier of treasure, so it made sense that there were so many. Lionel narrowed down the options in the same fashion. He eventually settled on a skin-tight armor not much different from his compression shirt. It was a sleek black, and the only difference was the fact it was dotted with small hexagons that flashed an imperceptible black light every so often. For his second Tier 5 treasure, Lionel chose a pair of shoes that had the ability to camouflage themselves into his chosen design. Not only did it have a small bit of defense, but it could increase his speed and agility by 0.1 each. When Lionel got to his Tier 4 treasures, he realized why Montez advised him not to trade them in. He could think of so many things he needed that he almost felt depressed that there were just 5 choices left. First, he chose a container. It was shaped like a box forged of steel, but it had thick leather straps. Its height was about 1 meter and its width about half of one. From the outside, it seemed to have less carrying capacity than the wooden box Lionel used in the Mayan temple. But one would be shocked to find that it could house 200 long-form darts compared to 50 from the Mayan container. In addition, as long as Lionel hovered his hand over it, a dart would immediately enter his palm. The best part about this treasure was that it could produce darts itself. It came pre-made with 200, but as long as Lionel fed it materials, it could make more. Lionel was extremely happy finding such a perfect treasure for him. The second Tier 4 black treasure he took was another technique. This one was called I Call of the Winda. It was a throwing technique that taught the use of wind-negating abilities to increase the speed of one's spears or darts. The third Leon chose was a sturdier atlatl. The combination of these higher-tech darts and this technique would completely shatter the atlatls the Mayans built. Plus, everything he got from the temple would disappear once he left this place anyway. The fourth Lionel chose was a crude sensor. It could sense the opening of a zone within 10 miles, and also point out the direction, like a compass. In addition, with a large margin of error, it could estimate the grade of the zone as well. The fifth and final treasure Lionel chose wasn't for himself. It was a bracelet that acted as a one-time defensive token. Though it was a Tier 4 black treasure, since it was only one-time use, it was more powerful than other treasures of its tier. Of course, he had traded for it for the sake of Aina. He may have not known the details of Aina's likes and dislikes, but he knew of her disposition. If he tried to give her too much, Lionel was certain she would reject. But this small token, maybe she just might say yes. Oha, Uncle Monteza. What are you loitering around for? That was your final pick. Do you maybe have a place I can wash myself in? I can't see her like this. It'll be a disaster. Montez looked blankly at Lionel before almost falling over in laughter. Sure. Whatever. Since you were so quick, you have 15 minutes left. Montez waved his hand and the counter disappeared, replaced by a small pond of water that fogged with a dense white. Lionel didn't hesitate. They were all men here anyway. He stripped off all his worn armor and dropped them to the ground, jumping in to scrub himself furiously. He was so obsessed with getting as clean as possible that he completely missed Montez's sharpening gaze at the sight of the faint scar on his right hip. And since he missed that, he also missed the surge of fury. As for Lionel, it wasn't really his fault that he missed this. The pond was much too comfortable. He forgot the joy of cleaning oneself. But, even more curious, this water didn't seem to be normal by any stretch of the imagination. Lionel could even faintly feel his senses sharpening. By the end of 10 minutes, his reactions had increased to 0.95 before stopping. In addition, his coordination followed suit, stopping at 0.9. With just 5 minutes left, Lionel hopped out. He slid on his new Tier 5 black flexible armor first, allowing it to perfectly adjust to his size and shape. He felt his stamina tick up by 0.05 Detroit. Then he slipped on his raggedy pair of sweatpants that he had luckily cleaned first this time. Though they had been soggy, Montez was nice enough to wave a hand and dry them clean. There were a lot of holes in them, but at least they covered his most important parts. Last came his pair of Tier 5 black shoes, which he disguised as sneakers. He then slid on the steel container and hooked his white, boned atlatl to his waist. Gripping the rest of his stuff, he bowed his head in thanks to Montez. "Thank you, Uncle Montez." Montez smiled and waved, sending Lionel. Mwah. On the top of the Mayan temple, the situation was completely different to how Lionel had left. Not only had his friends woken up, but judging by their appearances and how there were fewer of them than before, they had also cleared their first zone as well. Montez had downplayed how long he took to recover Lionel back to his full state. If Lionel's constitution had been better, he could have healed him in an instant. But due to Lionel's weak body, Montez had to take his time. Like this, though Lionel was the first to clear a zone, he was actually last in place to return. Maybe only the first few people who awoke knew that he had entered first stop. "What the hell are you trying to do, Conrad?" James stood towering, his injuries from that night clearly healed. But it seemed that he was still in quite a bad state, a reality that would have left Lionel surprised. Why had his guardian healed him, but not James? However, a moment later Lionel would realize that it was because James had been hurt outside of the zone. Conrad sneered. "This isn't the normal world order anymore, James. Just because you were bigger and stronger than me before, doesn't mean you are now. I won't need you to be drunk to kill you this time. You have a lot of nerve puffing your chest out like that after sneak attacking me in my sleep. Sure, it's a new world order, but you're still the same pussy." Conrad's gaze turned crimson, the space around him heating furiously. "You want to say that again? Even if it's a new world order, your family still exists on the outside. And don't think I've forgotten what you failed to do during the championship game." James' own gaze turned dangerous. "If you died here, who of the Siegfried family would even know or care? If you think I'm just going to let you use the girls of my Royal Blue Academy just to vent your lust, you have another thing coming." Several girls sat cowering to James's back, their eyes filled with fear. They realized that in this world, they didn't have the same protections they once dawned among them. Yuri and Savan were present, but there was no sign of Ina. As though on cue, a portal slowly formed. A delicate beauty with a battle axe twice the size of her body appeared. Her presence was so captivating that it was almost too easy to ignore the weapon on her back, and the odd out-of-place black bag in her hand. Ina's steps paused, her gaze sweeping over the surroundings only to stop on Yuri and Savan. Looking at the tears that streaked their faces and their disheveled clothing, her gaze once more shifted to Conrad. At that moment, another portal appeared. Conrad's expression turned ugly when he saw Lionel's smiling face. He was shocked to see how many items Lionel had brought with him. How had he gotten so much? Ina, too, saw Lionel. In fact, her gaze didn't leave Lionel's as she walked to Conrad's back. Her arm shot forward, piercing through to Conrad's chest. The image of a petite girl with an arm covered in blood was an image Lionel would never forget. He had been smiling brightly just a moment ago, his eyes finally landing on the beauty he had been thinking of for so long ago, only for it to freeze in his shock. Conrad didn't get to speak another word before he slumped to the ground, sliding off of Ina's forearm as though she deliberately slowed him down, so that Lionel would capture every moment. Lionel felt that his world had come to a complete grinding halt. Chapter 17. Abilities. Lionel stood frozen, his silver rod gripped tightly in one hand and the bracelet he had traded for Ina in his other. He hardly heard the shrieks of the girls cowering behind James as he watched her use Conrad's own shirt to wipe his blood from her arm. Ina's gaze didn't ever seem to leave his own. Maybe it was Lionel's own illusion, he wasn't sure. But what was certain was that Ina made her way over to him. In a series of events that were nothing more than a blur to him, his bag, the one she had been carrying all this time, the very one he had allowed her to use as a pillow, ended up in his hand. The very same hand he held the bracelet in. The massive battle axe on her seemingly delicate back cast a shadow over his face, dwarfing him completely. Lionel wasn't even consciously aware of what happened next. He only caught small tidbits. Savan was too scared to approach Ina anymore. Yuri's demeanor changed with Aina's appearance as though she had never been afraid. The odd world they were in began to tremble. And before Leonel knew it, he was standing on the grass gardens that once surrounded the northern dormitories. All he could think about was Aina's gaze. Her amber, almost golden eyes peering through his soul. It wasn't particularly cold, nor did it fill him with fear, but there was something deeply unsettling about them, a feeling that set an itch he couldn't reach in his heart. Leo! Leo! Leonel's eyes flashed as his body shifted to the side. He stuck his silver rod into the soft soil beneath him and used his now free hand to grab to the side. His reactions were inconceivably quick. He hadn't even seen who attacked him from behind even to this moment. All he had was a frail wrist that almost seemed like it could snap with a single squeeze. Strength, 0.72? Leonel was stunned. Knowing he wouldn't be able to hold on for so with his 0.67 level strength, he used the attacker's momentum against them, pulling on their wrist and sweeping his leg across. That's the girl who threw up that daya. Leonel's white-pupiled underclassman flipped in the air, falling on her back with a resounding thud. James, who had been the one calling out to Leonel, blinked in shock before smiling bitterly. It seemed his best friend had had his own massive improvements. In fact, with how alert Leonel had been even in a daze just now, he had a feeling that Leonel had suffered more than them all. Yet, he had somehow managed to keep a bright smile on his face when he came back, only for him to lose that smile due to that event that shocked even James himself. He really didn't know how to console Leonel. Leonel is too soft-ta. How could he deal with the girl he's chased for 5 years now being chat? James sighed. We can't stay here. Leonel finally pulled himself out of his slump. He knew that this wasn't the time to be sulking. Grabbing his silver rod, he pressed it to his underclassman's chest, using his leverage to stop her from using her obscene strength. With a quick glance around, he understood the situation. Luckily, in the months they had been gone, the white-pupiled mutants had dispersed. But with Leonel's senses, he could hear many of them approaching as though they could grasp their location. Leonel counted the number of people around him, feeling a sudden pang when he realized that the number was much less than it should have been. Xaviera? James's jaw clenched. I entered the sub-dimensional zone with him. Milan and Jola Xavier didn't make it off. Leonel's heart beat erratically for a long while before he managed to stop it. There had been over 30 of them in the beginning, but now only 12 remained. In fact, he felt that it could only have been luck that allowed most of them to survive a zone. The fiendish struggling beneath the butt of his silver rod caught Leonel's attention, causing him to frown. Before he could react, a flying dagger flew between he and James, entering the girl's throat. Leonel looked over with a gloomy expression as the girl's life slipped away. His eyes met Yuri's. She stood beside Aina with her arm raised, her expression nonchalant as though nothing had happened. Aina's gaze had been indifferent, but Yuri's almost held a teasing expression. It was the kind of look that made Leonel's frown deepened. What the hell are you doing? Leonel asked. Yuri seemed surprised by Leonel's tone for a moment. Maybe it was because she felt what she had done was only natural. Or maybe it was because she didn't think that Leonel had such a fierce gaze in him. It was obvious that she wasn't in senior class A along with him, or else she would never have such a naive thought. The only reason Leo's imposing aura had never come into play to now was because he couldn't pull his will behind killing. But when it came to his instinctual rage, there was nothing holding it back. Yuri recovered, her expression dialing back to a neutral gaze that almost said, "Just wait." A moment later, the girl who lay dead beneath Leonel began to glow, turning into motes of light that fused with Yuri. Leonel hadn't scanned the stats of his friends because it was an instinct he reserved for enemies. But he could faintly feel that Yuri had improved in strength by a small fraction. It was too small of a fraction for Leonel to pinpoint, but he could vaguely feel it. The reason he kept his stats to just 2 significant figures was because his senses weren't yet sharp enough to break it down further. If he had to guess, Yuri's improvement was somewhere between 0.0001 and 0.0001. Miss Aina believes that it's best we work together in such a dangerous environment, so instead of being offended by your question, I will explain it to you. These white-pupiled people are called invalids. They're the people who during their awakening were instead eaten by their abilities, failing to fuse with them. As a result, they've lost their consciousness, being a humanoid mass of instincts. If they swallow those of us who succeeded, They have a chance to evolve and regain their consciousness. The reason they allowed us to enter the subdimensional zone first is because it's in their best interest that we are stronger. They were fattening us like pigs, so to speak. However, they are essentially a bundle of energy now. So, by killing them, we can also grow stronger. That invalid was a C-grade invalid. It is impressive that you were able to handle her so easily. You are worth forming a working relationship with. Do you have any more questions? Lionel's gaze turned dull. One couldn't see it, but the veins of his right hand bulged like raging serpents as he clutched the bracelet in his palm. There was something exceptionally dangerous about his darkened look. Miss Aina, is it? Lionel closed his eyes. Congratulations. The abrupt beeping that filled all of their minds completely interrupted the tense atmosphere. You all have managed to succeed in crossing this first trial. Though many have fallen, you can be considered the true pillars of our Ascension Empire. However, be warned, all is not safe. These white-pupiled individuals may have once been your friends and family, but right now, their only instinct is to swallow you. They are known as invalids, though they appear in the same form they once had when they were alive. They are little more than energy with substance now. Invalids follow the same grading system as your subdimensional zones, from the F grade to the SSS grade. Be mindful and stay safe. Right now, the next goal of our empire is to gather you heroes together. Your wristwatches will point you toward the closest center of power in your region. Please head there as quickly and safely as possible, so that you can be properly registered. Those who fail to do so will be considered an enemy of the Ascension Empire. The voice was no longer mechanical. In fact, it was distinctly human. Lionel had heard this very voice before. Many times before, actually. It was the Emperor of the Ascension Empire, Emperor Gervais Fox. They want us to register. Why would they need that? Can't they already monitor USA? Unless, Lionel's eyes flashed open, a sudden realization overcoming him. It seemed the forceful tweaks the Empire made to their technology weren't exactly perfect quite yet. Maybe they still weren't aware that Lionel was the first to enter and clear a zone either. As expected, what their oh-so-noble emperor left them wasn't a true map, but rather simply pointed toward a direction, much like the Tier 4 black detector Lionel had for subdimensional zone. The Ascension Empire had always been touchy about distributing maps. Once the announcement was finished, Lionel looked back over toward Yuri and Aina. However, this time, he didn't spare Yuri a glance. If you'd like to work with me, then the orders we follow are mine. Are we clear on this? Yuri frowned and seemed to want to respond, but Aina's delicate hand blocked her. Yes, that isn't a problem. You seem to have strong sensory abilities. It's only right that you lead. Lionel so very rarely heard Aina speak, but her voice was just as angelic as he remembered. He still couldn't wrap his mind around her actions. How could he like a girl who treated lives so casually? He knew well what Conrad had done. Maybe to some he deserved death. But Lionel just had a hard time crossing that line. Maybe he was a hypocrite for it, but it was just how he felt. Hearing these words, Lionel stuffed the bracelet into the ragged pockets of his sweats. He turned his body away, not replying. You all right, Leo? James whispered to his side. I'm fine, Lionel said with a bitter smile. Don't worry about me, I think I've already been through worse. James patted his shoulder and didn't say much more. All right. Lionel raised his voice once more. The invalids aren't far from us already, but I think it's important that I get a read on your abilities before we move out. Mine seem to be categorized as heightened senses, so I'll do my best to lead you out while avoiding as many battles as possible. James, who had almost always been able to read Lionel even without a cue, spoke next. Mine and Milan's abilities are very similar. It's how we survived in the zone. Milan can form a strong shield that can block up to 10 C-grade attacks and 1 B-grade attack before failing. He needs 3 seconds to form it, and he can form 3 total before he needs to rest. He also has improved strength beyond normal levels. I also gained this strength boost and a similar shield, but I have 2 separate shields. One can absorb attacks. The other can repel attacks. My shield has an effective range of 5 meters and form a dome. Milan's form a semi-sphere and has a range of 3 meters. I can vary the strength of my shield as well. A 1-second shield can block 2 C-grade attacks. A 10-second shield can absorb or repel 10 B grade attacks or 1 A grade attack. The last point is just that my absorb shield replenishes my stamina. The reflective shield is self-explanatory. Lionel's brows cocked, pleasantly surprised. Milan's ability was probably graded as a C, but James was at least an A from what he could tell as well. Milan's strength was a 0.59, but James was a 0.75. The difference was stark. Milan laughed jovially, albeit self-deprecatingly. Seems I'm a little lacking in comparison. James grinned, wrapping his arm around Milan's neck and giving the big guy a noogie. You're not alone. Joel laughed, lifting up a pole arm that was just over 2 meters long. My ability is related to sharpness, I think. I can add a decent bit of piercing power to the weapons I use, which is why I chose this F-grade pike as a reward. Joel was a 3-star linebacker for their Royal Blues. He had dark skin and kind brown eyes. But when he was on the field, many maligned him as a headhunter for his vicious hits. Lionel could tell that Joel's coordination stat was 0.65, definitely far above average. With that, Lionel went through everyone one by one, calmly memorizing their abilities. Finally, he got to Yuri and Aina. My ability is related to marksmanship with a small bit of telekinesis. Yuri explained calmly. I can improve the accuracy and strength of my throwing knives with my mind. And Dahai, I can also retrieve them. The dagger she had thrown earlier, still stabbed into the grass, trembled before flying back into her hand obediently. Miss Aina's ability is an overall exponential boost to her physical abilities, whether that be speed, agility, reactions, and especially strength. These were words Leon almost definitely didn't doubt. Aina Brazinger. Speed, 0.85. Agility, 0.8. Coordination, 5. Stamina, 0.95. Reactions, 0.97. Strength, 0.99.